Whew. All right, break time. I'm going uphill. So I get to say hi to you guys again and introduce you to episode 5 of VFX Talk Presents. This week we had a chance to interview Ian Fales of Befores and After magazine, and we got to geek out all about Cinefex journals and all the really amazing interviews he's had over the years. And he was joining me from Australia, so it was 9 a.m. his time, about 7 p.m. When I got on with him. And I've been just so looking forward to this interview. It's been a couple months that we've been getting the back and forth going on the schedule, and we finally lined it up and just had a great conversation. So it runs about an hour. Again, we cover just his career in all the unlikely path from studying law to then writing about visual effects for a living. And it's just because he's a fan. He wanted to learn how visual effects are done, and he loves movies. And now he's become one of the torchbearers, keeping the flame alive for the VFX community to highlight not only the really cool work that's being done, but also the really cool people that are actually doing the work. So legendary interviews. I mean, Dennis Murin, Steve Spaz Williams, we touch on all of that. Just absolute legends. I was joking, it sounded like he was talking about the Avengers half the time. Like, that's the level of reverence these guys have in the VFX community. So hope you guys enjoy it. Hope you guys have a good rest of your day or evening whenever you're joining us. And all right, I gotta get back to it because I gotta get back, showered, and get ready for work and get the day going. So all right, and again, you guys gotta go watch a really cool new episode of VFX Talk Presents with Ian Fales. So hope you all enjoy it. And if you guys have any requests for future interviews, we've got a bunch lined up, but we'd love to hear from you guys. So let us know in the comments, or head on over to the free VFX Talk Discord and join and let us know there. We'd love to have you. So, all right, gotta get back to it. All right, bye guys.
Nice to meet you too.
Thank you for, well, good morning, I guess, to you. It's the evening for my side of the world. So thank you for joining at 9 a.m. and for jumping back and forth, getting the schedule all together. I really appreciate it, man.
No problem at all. Where are you in the world again?
I am in Texas.
Oh, right. Okay.
Yeah.
Nice one.
Yeah, the other side, man. The other side of the world.
Sorry, I'm just turning off my notifications because they always beep a lot.
Oh yeah, well, see, you're a pro at this. I'm still learning how to
Not
do
at all.
these interviews and all the tech. Got to get it all set. I swear I know what I'm doing sometimes, but not every time.
No. So how's it all going? How's VFX Talk Discord going?
It's going good. Yeah, we've got over 1,000 members now, and still growing. And we're doing
That's awesome.
yeah, we're doing these. We've got some like fun little shop talks that some of our members are doing. That kind of get into more of the weeds of how to key, how to do just like we have so many experts that are just like ready to kind of share their information, and it's been really cool to see. I'm sure you're not unfamiliar with visual effects artists actually love to talk about visual effects, so you've kind of made a whole
Yeah,
career out of it.
I think they do, and I'm sure the Discord thing is an awesome idea. The challenge has always been how anonymous people want to stay,
Yeah,
right?
right.
Because they don't want to get in trouble with their employer, obviously. They don't want to start a fight, but they kind of do.
Yeah, they kind
So
of. We had a great fight about postage stamps in Nuke. Oh man, it was like.
really, oh, that's nice and deep. That's a lot deeper and nuanced than the fights I'm thinking of, but I like it.
It was the
I like it a
nerdiest
lot.
argument I've heard in a very long time. It was great. But yeah,
Oh,
yeah, it's
cool.
fantastic. Yeah, well, I I'll just go ahead and jump into it because like I'm so thrilled to have today Ian Fales. Is that how you pronounce your last name?
Yes, it is. It's a shocker of a surname, but luckily there's an E in it.
I,
But yes, it is Fails.
well,
I've had to live with that all my life.
well, you've become a cornerstone of the VFX world through your VFX journalism, which I can't really say I know many other VFX journalists, but you've carved out this a really cool niche.
Yeah. Well, there are a few. It's funny, you start going to conferences and things around the world, and you meet these amazing people who do this kind of work as well, or who are as obsessed, I think, as I am.
Yeah,
I've loved meeting some people like Vincent from Art of VFX, who lives in Switzerland,
yeah.
and a really amazing journalist is Kendra from CGW. And there's also a lot of people who have been doing it for a long time, like Dan Sato at AWN.
Oh yeah. Cartoon
So
Brew. Yeah.
yeah, Amid from Cartoon Brew, and I think there's not that many, but the people that do it are quite obsessed with it and really great at it. So I'm very happy to be part of a smallish club.
Well, VFX artists know a little bit about obsession. I don't think we would be able to be in this industry very long if we weren't obsessed with visual effects and movies and TV shows and I mean everything now, you know?
Yes, yes. The obsession goes all the way from a journalist like through to obviously the artists and then the filmmakers themselves, which is, I think, why everyone does this. Not necessarily doing it for money,
No.
doing it for the love of it.
Well, I mean that's
So,
the thing with like VFXTalk. Like we're a free Discord. We'll always be a free Discord. Everybody, is lending their time just to keep the torch going, for like the next generation. And I really love what you're doing with the befores and afters, just because you're carrying on that torch of Cinefex. That I think we all. I mean, I personally really miss Cinefex and having journalists out there covering, doing these deep dives. You do these great like big topics, like you do the tent poles, but then you also do these really great niche deep dives into like some art. Like it's really really great, and I would love to just hear about how you got into like into
oh,
VFX journalism because
well,
it's great.
the reason I got into VFX journalism is pretty much because of Cinefex. So there it is.
You've got the
Um,
collection right there, man.
Yeah, I've got the full collection, and I completely miss it, and I think it was absolutely, if not the sole reason I'm doing what I'm doing, the major reason.
Yeah, I'm the same way.
Because yeah, and I'm gonna say it. Just want to say it right now before I forget to say it. Thank you so much for restarting the VFX Talk Discord or forum.
Yeah.
VFX Talk was something that I visited 6 times a day
Yep.
when I could, and there were other forums that I visited 6 times a day as well. And I miss some of those other ones, a CG Society and CG Talk was something that I used to love as well.
Me too. Yeah.
And, these things do fall by the wayside just because of all the reasons. But I was recently at SIGGRAPH talking to a friend of mine who I only recently found out was one of the founders of a CG website called Deathfall, which is a place.
Wait, I have heard of Deathfall. Okay, wait, that's tickling some part of back of my brain.
Yeah, and he's a owner of an animation studio in Mexico and was just part of this Deathfall website in the 2000s or the late 90s. And like one day we were just strolling down the street in LA and I mentioned this website to him and he says, I founded that website, don't you? Like I had no idea. But there's all these kind of places that influence me, and that's why I brought it up, is that they really influenced me and realized that there was this VFX community out there, animation community, CG community.
Yeah.
And in the early days of the internet, I think people were like, well, that's a great way to get the message out. But, some stuck around for 20 years, 25 years, and some obviously went away.
Yeah.
So it was definitely websites like that that got me inspired to do what I'm doing. But it was actually like a key moment that I can remember it started. And of course, I was interested in films and I love special effects and Star Wars and Back to the Future and Jurassic Park and all that kind of thing. But actually, when I was about 18, I went to this comic book store in Sydney and I lived about 80 kilometers south of Sydney. And there was Cinefex magazine for Jurassic Park: The Lost World.
Oh, wow.
I'm like, what is this? Like, A, it wasn't normal size magazine, as everyone knows. And B, it had, a dinosaur in the street of San Diego on the cover rather than an actor or a filmmaker or something like that. I didn't know Cinefex existed because they didn't have a website and they, just didn't really exist in a presence in Australia. So I opened it up, read it in the shop, bought it, came home. Then I did a bit of digging on the internet. I'll tell you, this is 1997, I think it is.
Okay.
So yeah, the film had come out in 97, so the magazine was out then. Anyway, I found out what Cinefex was and the history of that magazine. I went back to the comic book store like the next day, I think it was, and I found a few other issues. And I went up to the person at the front counter and said, "Do you have any of the old Cinefexes?" And he had this box that someone had given to him like a couple of days earlier of, old issues. And he said,
Wow.
"Yeah, this guy brought these in." I said, "I'll buy all of them." And so I did buy all of them. And that really started it off.
Yeah.
It was basically reading through Cinefexes. I couldn't believe there was a publication that covered this stuff. And I just always loved the actual style of writing. Like, that was really important to me. I thought they just did such a great job of it.
Yeah.
So
It
the
wasn't a really
beginnings of
fan
Cinefex.
magazine, right? It was like they actually did they interviewed, like the VFX supervisors and the people making the stuff and really dug deep. And I remember reading the same. It wasn't 96. I found it in 2002 when I had just graduated from high school. I took a gap year because I didn't really like. I was like, 93 happened. I knew I saw Jurassic Park. I knew I wanted to make movies, but there was really no way to get from Indiana, where I grew up at, like to where movies are made. It was like, how do you do it? There's no internet. And finally, in like 2000, I worked at a bookstore during my gap year, and they had all of those, a big magazine rack, and I was like, what? Wait, what is that on my break? And it was Phantom Menace. It was it was right when the model shops were still going. And I opened it. I was hooked. It was like, oh, that's how you do it. Oh wow,
Yeah.
they're talking to the guy. Like, he did that. That's so neat.
Yeah, and it really opened up a thing for me in terms of it. I mean, Cinefex was amazing, but it turns out there was a fair bit of visual effects coverage in other magazines like American Cinematographer.
Yeah.
And a couple of, like, I don't know how to describe them, but horror magazines or film fan magazines.
Yeah.
People will know.
Yeah.
Yes, and Fantastique. I have probably pronounced that incorrectly. But so, over the years, I would try and grab some past issues on eBay and whatnot. But I was slightly obsessed with the internet then, and I noticed after discovering Cinefex magazine in 96, 97, that there were slowly some VFX artists and people, publishing things about VFX. One of them, and I'm sure the VFX community knows this gentleman well, it's Todd Vazeri from ILM. And he, before he worked at ILM and before I think he even worked in VFX, published something called the VFX HQ.
I remember that.
And yes, and he managed to get a few interviews and pictures and things like that, as well as reviewing the VFX of the films. I reckon I went to his site 25 times a day, you know, and we're now buddies, which is so cool, to think like that lineage from that long ago.
That's so neat.
And of course, he works at ILM as a comsup. But it basically was discovering Cinefex, discovering a bit of a community online. And then I went away, I went to university, did a completely different piece of area of
You're
study.
studying law, right?
That's right.
That's crazy.
And I worked as a lawyer for 10 years. So I kind of love movies and visual effects, but just as a fun thing, and thought I really should try and get a real job or whatever we call that.
Proper job, yeah.
Yeah. But while I was working as a lawyer, I couldn't forget about the visual effects stuff. So I started a blog in the early 2000s, which was when blogs were kind of going bananas.
Yeah.
And it was pretty awesome way to publish content. So it was called VFX Blog, and it lasted for a long time. And originally was me just posting links to pieces of visual effects information. I mean, in some ways, that's what I use Twitter to do, post links to whatnot now.
Yeah.
But then I thought, why not do a couple of interviews? And the funniest thing is, the first interview I ever did was with the editor of Cinefex, Jodie Duncan.
Really?
So that published on VFX Blog, and she was very generous to write back to me and answer some fun questions. And then it just kind of snowballed where like, oh, you can reach out to these companies and ask them about the films they're working on. And that's what I did. But the craziest thing, Doug, was that I had a real job, like in a government department in Australia as a lawyer.
Yeah.
And so sometimes the interviews were done by Q&A email. That was kind of easy. But really, I wanted to talk to them. So I would ring them up, and this is sort of before Skype, I think.
Yeah.
So I'd ring them up on international lines, from Australia, and interview them, go to work, because of course the time difference meant that it was best to call them at like 7 a.m. Australia time. Go to work, and then I'd come home and transcribe them from tape that I recorded off my phone.
Wow.
And then stay up all night writing a story or just, doing the interview. So that's how it happened. It was all just for fun, not for money, not for didn't think it would become a job or anything like that. I just really wanted to learn more about how these films were made. And I actually, in some ways, focused on things that I didn't think Cinefex was covering, because they didn't cover every single film.
Yeah.
There's just so many, and TV shows and whatnot. So yeah, VFX Blog was basically my start into publishing something of my own.
That's amazing.
So yeah.
And what was it? Was it when Cinefex went away that you were just like, you know what, I'm getting off the internet. I want paper. I want a book. I'm gonna do this crazy thing called self-publishing. Is that when you jumped in?
Well, no. I had no idea Cinefex was going away. That was really sad.
Yeah,
I mean,
lots
of magazines have, of course, not stuck around because it's expensive to print things and send them around the world. But at some point, I was working as a lawyer, and then I was still publishing things on VFX Blog. But the team at FX Guide happened to be in Sydney, and they said, why don't you stop competing with us for stories and whatnot and just come and work for us? And I thought that was super cool. So I did that. And of course, they ran FX PhD, the training company, as well.
Yeah. Yeah. I'm actually doing a tutorial series for them right now. It's like a total dream
amazing.
Come true, because I learned so much from those guys early on, and I was like, oh my gosh, okay, yeah, please.
Yeah. It was an incredible place because I was writing stories and interviewing people and going to SIGGRAPH and all this sort of thing. But then because they had the studio and they were doing training, I feel like I learned a lot about cameras and visual effects and filming. And like, that's just to reinforce as well, I'm not an artist or don't come from an artist background at all, which sucks sometimes. It would be really good
I don't know, man.
To know a bit
The
more.
artist thing is the tortured artist is a true thing. I've seen it a lot. So don't,
Yeah.
yeah,
But FX Go was purely online
yeah,
and was really great to publish that sort of stuff. But after FX Guide, I started writing for a bunch of magazines, including 3D World, 3D Artist, and the VES started a print mag, obviously.
yeah,
And I think it was really fun, holding those magazines and reading through them. I thought that was actually a great way, obviously, to digest lots of technical info, which is what I enjoyed about Cinefex too.
yeah,
So I guess in the back of my mind for a few years, I'd always planned to start a print issue. And I started it during COVID. So Cinefex was still around, I think, but basically announced soon after that it was going away.
yeah.
COVID was a great time to try something, I think, because I had a lot of time. But it was also the dumbest idea I'd ever had in my life, which
Sometimes
was
those are the best, man.
well, which was to get the magazine printed in Australia and then send it out around the world. And that turned out to be like a really fun thing to do in terms of designing it and working it out. But sending out a magazine around the world is a really challenging prospect because people don't receive it, or it's expensive to do, or the logistics of that are really tough. So just after COVID, I realized you could get things done print on demand
Yeah,
on Amazon, and that's how the magazine now gets out there. And I think it's a really awesome way for lots of people to grab it quickly, and and people are so used to receiving things on Amazon that it's just part of their
yeah.
daily life to order it.
It's super
So,
convenient, man. Like, and you have a ton of back issues too. So like, I remember like with Cinefex, like if you didn't get that issue when it came
mm,
out, man, like, whew, you're gonna start making a pretty penny like on eBay because the price went up really fast, and we're like, I want that issue. But
yeah.
you have so much access to all these back issues, and there's so much information in it. Like, especially post COVID, man. Like, I just want to commend you for biting the bullet and publishing this stuff, and all the other
Oh, thank you.
journalist sites that are doing this stuff too, because we're VFX artists are used to being in the shadows. We kind of like being behind the scenes. Usually,
Mm,
if we haven't done our job well, is when you notice the visual effects. So we like to hide, and we've seen like the no CGI movement, and we've seen kind of this, the industry rocked by all these new tech advances and all this stuff, and everything shifted to social media and kind of like the toxic echo chambers. The
mm,
community started really kind of struggling, and having publications like befores and afters and Cartoon Brew and AWS and all the BS stuff, it keeps us together and it keeps us passionate about like this crazy VFX industry that we kind of end up,
yeah.
making.
It is a crazy industry. I think I'm trying at befores and afters in the stories just to concentrate really hard on just saying what was the work that was done,
Yeah,
you know, and none of the articles will ever be sort of controversial about, oh, isn't it crazy that they didn't talk about the CG and all that sort of thing. I leave that to more kind of like podcasts or online commentary. And I think what's been really good, especially with that weird no CGI thing, is that there's been a few um, leaders online talking about that. Of
yeah,
course, I'm talking about Todd Vasari, but also Jonas from Denmark,
yeah. Hugo, he's
um,
been
Hugo, of
vocal. Yeah,
course. Yeah, and even the VES in more recent times has jumped up and said, well, this isn't right, and we need to celebrate visual effects
yeah,
and not try and hide it. Which I think we could talk for 4 hours, Doug, about why that happens, and I. I'm really upset that it happens, and hopefully people could tell that in pieces I did with Hugo last year and other things at conferences. But my plan is to be like, well, this is the film that came out or the show, and let's try and talk about it as much as we can about what the actual work was.
yeah,
The challenge is, and I won't mention any particular projects, but it is true that studios say, no, you're not allowed to talk about this. And when I say studios, I mean the film studios.
Yeah.
You know, VFX studios, of course, want to get their work out there. So they're the politics of what was actually done is often still a bit strange to me and still impacts my coverage. I don't quite know what to do about it.
Well, I
I
think
thought it would get better, and I'm
well,
not sure it has.
I
Yeah.
think the more you shine the spotlight on these types of topics, the better. Like even
Mm.
with like all of the AI stuff that's been happening in the past year during the strikes, like it was like the perfect storm, man. It was just
Yeah.
really intense. But I saw a lot of artists that they saw the generative AI coming out and just saying, "I'm not touching it. I'm 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 going to ignore it." And then I saw a lot of other artists saying like, "Okay, I'm going to start learning about this because the only way that I can kind of
Mm.
know the enemy is, I have to learn about it." And then we started seeing what it can and can't do. We saw the Foundry adopting a lot of these really useful machine learning tools with like the Cattery and releasing and start really kind of instead of not talking about it, we start to really dig in and say, okay, what are these tools capable of? Because then once you started getting down to the facts, the emotions go out the window, the fear goes out the window, and you actually see what it is.
Yeah. Yes, and it's interesting you mentioned Gen AI in that way because that's it all did happen at once, didn't
Yeah.
it? The strikes and then generally studios seeming to be even weirder about no CGI and then the AI side of things. And the challenge I think is that it all kind of gets grouped into one, whereas I think they are sort of separate
Yeah, I think they
challenges
are.
that VFX going through. And the Gen AI thing is fascinating to me because one of the challenges is the way we talk about it. Lucky you. I think it's great you said Gen AI because of course people just tend to say AI,
Yeah.
and really they mean so many things: Gen AI, machine learning, whatnot. I think there's a whole bunch of visual effects studios, if not all of them, using machine learning in really efficient ways,
Oh yeah.
doing their own training, using copycat, whatnot, and all that sort of thing as well separately. Um, and they're using it in the same way they might just adopt a new tool, um, because that's kind of how visual effects has rolled for the past 40 years, which is new technology, new
Yeah.
technology, new
Well,
technology.
we talk about Jurassic Park in '93, but that's exactly what happened. It was that big shift between the old school analog, the hands-on optical printers and all that,
Mm,
to digital, and there was this massive shift.
yeah. Yes, but I think the problem is it gets wrapped up, and this, by the way, I think it's a good thing that people speak out about AI. Especially, I'm really sort of anti-scraping,
Yeah, me
you
too.
know, and most people are, because it's basically pure copyright infringement.
Yeah,
But the results people get are just so incredible. I think they're just drawn to the results so quickly.
yeah,
But to me, it seems like some of the visual effects studios using AI machine learning well are not doing that at all. And some of the stuff being used for face replacement or incredible getting mats and just, I mean, I really think that some of the Disney group of companies, to be honest, have really being very ethical. But I love what Weather Effects is doing with machine learning and did on the Avatar sequel.
yeah,
What Rising Sun has been doing with its revise and face replacement work. These aren't, they might use some generative AI workflows, but they're not grabbing copyrighted
yeah. It's about the
material and,
data.
and reusing it. Yeah.
Like I love like you're seeing Zemeckis getting into it with here coming up, and
Yeah.
if I gotta make a plea, please do a deep dive into that workflow because I think I think it's going to be a key moment going forward. We're going to benchmark it from that point. It's Zemeckis, of course we will, but at that moment, it was a really cool way to showcase AI, but all the data was publicly. It's young, Tom Hanks. It's young.
Yeah.
It's all. Nothing is being stolen. It's using the tool to do this new thing in a ethical way.
I think so, and you've got the actors at least agreeing to it, even if it is from other old films or photos.
Yeah.
There's a very different side of it when they are part of the process. You know,
Yeah,
um,
very much so.
yeah, I can't wait to see here and to try and talk about the technology. I will say that I think the main studio behind that work has kind of deliberately been a little bit secretive on some other projects, but that's okay. They're more of a tech company in some ways than a VFX company. This is metaphysics.
Yeah.
And I think the stuff they're doing is really interesting, fascinating. But until here, I don't think they've been particularly vocal about their film VFX work,
Yeah. Yeah, I
which
mean,
is interesting.
it is very, I mean, I think they're used to kind of being in the lab tinkering with stuff, like, and
True.
now it's getting to the point where it's ready for showtime. And I think if it's handled responsibly, and I was happy to see Zemeckis at the helm of that, because Back to the Future, Zemeckis will always hold
Yeah.
a dear place in my heart. I think he's a really good bridge between this new evolution that's about to happen, and will hopefully kind of point us in the right in the right direction. Because if we don't,
Yeah.
it can get misused. Artist work can get stolen. It can get really nasty. You know?
I agree. Yes, Zemeckis in particular has always seemed to adopt new filmmaking technologies to tell his stories. And he has such a great team with him at the moment as well, doing virtual production, but also this de-aging, I guess
Yeah.
we could generally call it, work as well.
Yeah.
No, super excited by here. In fact, that's probably something that um, marks my approach to visual effects journalism is like, I'll hear about these projects and just be like so excited to learn how they were done. I'm always hopeful that the film is great, which is
Yeah.
not always the case, obviously.
I remember Beowulf.
Yeah.
It wasn't fantastic, but it was what it was.
Yeah, yeah. But I think I just love that all this innovation is going on, and it really is always in the aid of the story.
Yeah.
But you'll hear about this project, and because it is secretive, which is a good thing. You don't want details to leak, or you don't want to be spoiled, about the plot. But there's a couple of things brewing, I think, that I've been hearing about that I'm just like, oh well, I can't wait to see what this filmmaker
Yeah.
does with it. And then you learn who the visual effects supervisor is, and you go, oh, I can't wait to hear what so and so is doing with this material.
Well, and it's
So,
that excitement too. I like seeing you get like I saw you get excited when you're thinking about like, oh, that new movie coming out. Because like
mm,
I was talking to a lady over. Her name's Esmeralda Ramirez in the previous video. She's over at Warner Brothers. She's
hmm
senior VFX coordinator. And man, she's in LA. She's been going through the same strikes that has been rocking
mm,
the industry, and she was still so positive and like in love with visual effects. I was like, how do you do that? And she just
mm,
genuinely loves movies, and we're just like,
mm.
I'm just excited about. It was that childhood, you know, love of what we're doing, and
Yeah,
it's really cool to see it kept alive. And I think visual effects journalism does that because if we don't talk about it, like it just kind
yeah.
of goes away.
No, and that's a really good thing to bring up, of course, is the state of the industry, which, I mean, how can you say it other than it's dire straits at
Yeah.
the moment? It's the weirdest time I've noticed. Having not been an artist in the industry, I've always still noticed that visual effects does a bit of up and down,
Hmm.
and everyone can remember the rhythm and hues stuff, and other times when it's been crazy, after COVID was crazy busy, everyone seemed to have a job, and then after the strikes and more, that we found ourselves where we are. But I would agree with you that there remains this enthusiasm and optimism,
Yeah.
for good visual effects content, whether that be film, games, TV. I mean, part of it too sometimes seems wrapped in what is out and how things are going. In the beginning of this year, I think there were some big films that didn't do so well, and they kind of um, that sort of set the mood for how some people were feeling about visual effects. And then, A Quiet Place sequel comes out, Twisters, Deadpool and Wolverine, Inside Out 2.
Yeah.
and you just feel this uplift in like, oh, those films relied heavily on CG, animation, visual effects.
They weren't
I
all done in
think
camera? Really? Wow, that's crazy.
I just I just think sometimes it needs these huge films to do well, that
Yeah.
to bring some level of optimism. But of course, we're still dealing with a really crazy time when it's not just post strikes or post COVID. It seems to me to be right. These streamers are going to make less content, and I mean, how do you deal with that other than think there's going to be less visual effects work, which is really scary.
Yeah. Well,
Um,
and I think
but
there's cause for hope though. There's still like I just a couple weeks like the numbers came out that for the first time the Disney turned a profit in streaming and their
sure,
parks
yeah,
took a dip. That's another I've never seen that. That's a once in a lifetime thing. The parks were less profitable than this crazy money pit that was streaming. And that
yeah.
means we need content, especially coming off of strikes. So
Mm,
I'm hoping that
mm,
that spins things up. That's kind of what we're hearing. The survive till 25 motto.
yeah.
Did you see any shirts at SIGGRAPH? I was like, there has to be a shirt made, man.
I I tell you what, SIGGRAPH and a few other events that I've gone to this year are really interesting events for discussion about the industry. Everyone is really aware that it's the hardest times in recent memory,
Yeah.
but also they are optimistic. And I tell you what else, Doug, they love getting together. People love to
Oh
be in
yeah.
the same room at these events. I think partly it's because a lot of us are working from home, and part of it is memories of COVID.
Yeah.
You know, so whenever people get together, there's some optimism, which is great. I just think one of the challenges is we don't have the answers. We used to be able to say, oh, it's because there's a race to the bottom and these visual effects studios didn't do, that's why they're falling away. And that's still true, but I think now with just maybe less content being made or funded at the moment,
Yeah.
and then coming out of the strikes, people are like not really sure what's going to happen. And Survive to 25 is absolutely what people think, but I think even when we get to January, February, I think we'll still be wondering what the solution is.
Yeah. Well,
You know?
and we have these. It's funny you talk about community because when we started up VFX Talk, I really just thought it would be kind of like the old boards. We just post links. We talk about, oh, this was
Yeah.
really cool. Share information. But then we also started doing these weekly office hours, and it would be like a group hang like this, and it almost became like a therapy session for like
Mm,
a lot of
mm,
visual effects artists. We're all just like, man, I haven't talked to somebody in a while, like just about water cooler stuff, about visual effects.
mm,
Everybody wants to talk about this stuff, and everybody was feeling very isolated. And COVID, I think the lingering effects of that were still happening, and the strikes, and then they're questioning what happens next. And there is a really cool thought that it keeps coming up with a lot of people, and that's the visual effects industry after in 25 is going to be completely, it's going to be different. And the
mm,
idea of these um, micro studios, these artist run little pockets of
mm.
remote artists that are all very skilled and all can have their own workstations because we had to. And now we have cloud computing, we have all these render farms. AWS is just spinning up their own. There's this interesting
Yeah.
vibe going on of just like um, smart artists just wanting to make really cool visual effects, and they're starting to see there might be a different way going forward, and we might just have to kind of reconcile with that.
Yes, it might not be wanted as much as we think it is, but it's just happening.
Yeah.
And it's happening because of the virtual work that we did out of COVID. I think I totally agree, and I'm already seeing it. The one thing I'll ask you though is, do you miss being in a studio? And I mean, that's obvious. You just said it was nice when people get together and talk together. But I think
Yeah.
that's where the conversation seems to go whenever I chat to a whole group of artists. They of course love the convenience of working from home, especially if you've got a long commute or you've got kids or you just have a comfortable home office.
Yeah, I got
But
to
they
hate
do
Mercedes,
miss
man.
the
It's great.
camaraderie.
Yeah, I miss the camaraderie. I miss the um you know, like both me and my wife worked at the same studio for
Mm,
12 years at
yeah, wow.
RealFX in Dallas, and
Mm,
some of our best friends are still there. You know, you develop those lifelong friendships when you're in that like that fire of doing a movie together,
mm,
and it's definitely different in the post remote world. But you you now, you know, we're in Texas, so there's not that many animation or VFX studios in Texas. Now we have access to a very large talent pool of
mm,
different gigs and different people that, you know, are available to work, which is great. Um, it's just different. There's definitely like a pre-COVID and a post-COVID. You know,
yeah.
it's different.
Yeah. And I mean, it's pretty, it's pretty, I think visual effects artists, animation artists, they're pretty amazing how flexible and, you know, how they've survived this period, basically.
Yeah,
I mean that turnaround like in March 2020 of like sending everyone home was insane how that went down.
it was like 2 weeks.
But then
It was
yeah,
so fast.
incredible. But to continue that work and to beat the main issue that I remember was you couldn't work from home because of security reasons and the threat that you'd leak everything. I mean, I
Yeah,
just don't think there's been a single incident that I've heard of. There might have been things that have happened that they've kept under the, you know,
yeah,
swept under the rug, but that's just basically showing the trust level is high. VFX artists want to work, and you know they've made it work.
yeah,
So I again that sort of I bring it up because brings it makes me feel optimistic about the future of adapting to all these changes. You
yeah.
know.
You know, and I wanted to ask you too. You know, you talk about like, you know, visual effects artists, how you know, we're kind of problem solvers just by nature, and we definitely have this weird brain that is kind of split right down the middle between very technical and very creative, and
Mm.
that's kind of a through thread with pretty much every VFX artist I've ever met. Have you found like in recent who's like your favorite interview you've ever done that is really like the antithesis of like that visual effects artist, you know, that
Oh my gosh.
I know, big question. Throw you in it. Let's go. I really just want to hear you interview
Mm.
Spaz, and I want to hear all about Spaz.
Oh, oh well, Spaz. Oh my gosh. I have been really lucky to interview Spaz many times. And um, uh,
He's a legend,
it's hard to talk about Spaz because he absolutely changed the visual effects and filmmaking industry
almost
with his
single-handedly.
colleagues at ILM.
Yeah,
Um, in recent times, he's been very outspoken about his views about people he used to work with in the studios and companies, and of course, he's kind of out of the industry now.
yeah,
And I they're legit views, and of course, if you watch that documentary, Jurassic Punked, I
yeah.
think it is.
Yeah, it's great.
Um, yeah, it showcases a lot of his views. Um, but if you when you get him on a good day, he could talk about the shots in Terminator 2 like they happened yesterday.
Yeah,
And I'm pretty sure it's in one of my big Terminator articles or in something else I did for Cartoon Brew or something else that got published on VFX blog. I regularly go back to that interview with him and Mark Dippé talking about the T1000 exiting the exploded truck
uh-huh.
in Terminator 2, and I just reread them talking about that sequence, and I think they just are talking about it as if they'd worked on it the week before, and of course it's uh, 20 years ago, 30 years ago. Oh my
It's a lot
gosh.
longer. Yeah.
Yeah. So
Well,
that yeah,
I
funny
bring
you brought up Spaz because I recently reread that interview and with him and Mark DePay as well, and it's just awesome to hear them talk about that work.
well, and I bring him up too because like he's you know, he is definitely outspoken. There's no filter on him whatsoever, and he's
Yeah.
and he's a genius. Like
unarguably, like, he's a genius, and all of his
Mm,
colleagues at ILM, especially at that time, they had to be these kind of crazy geniuses to,
mm.
one, leave the T-Rex up on his monitor when Kathleen Kennedy's walking. That is such a punk rock move to
It's
like
very
do that.
ballsy.
Oh my! And then his bosses. Oh my gosh! It was like there's he's there's always a double-edged sword to that genius, and
Mm,
there's a lot of VFX artists that I've seen burn out just because they can't keep that genius, that tiger, in its cage. And I think he's a really good model of that because he's just, you know,
yeah, I think, the other thing is he can be outspoken because he's not in the industry anymore, but it's rare to be outspoken in visual effects and animation. And it's also totally fair enough not to be because you want to keep your job.
yeah.
Um, Almost the only other person I can think of like that is Phil Tippett, who's of course a legend, been around for so
See,
long.
it's like you're talking about the
And
Avengers, man. Like it's just like then I got to talk to. It's crazy. These are like
yeah,
heroes of the VFX industry.
yeah, and I think he's done a lot of good talking about what he thinks about how visual effects shots get done these days. And everyone will know about this famous comment, which I'm not going to quote, where he said, you know, we, I can't remember exactly what it was, but it was more about how people fuck with these shots too much. Sorry, we can't
Pic-
swear.
no, you told me
Um,
pixel fucking.
yeah,
Yeah,
yeah, and he
I know
didn't
all about
really
it.
use those words, but he basically said these days when you're reviewing a shot, you look for everything that's wrong with it. And in the old days, when he was working, at ILM, but also as Tippett Studio, it was the other way around. They just tried to make the shot better.
Yeah,
And that's a very nuanced difference. But I think all visual effects artists get it. And why do we sit in dailies watching these 2-second shots on loop over and over again?
yeah,
When in a film, they're going to go by amongst a bevy of other shots. I know the answer and I know the reason, but I think until he had kind of distilled that thought out for people, they hadn't really realized where computer graphics and digital visual effects had got to in terms of the pixel fucking.
yeah,
And I just really like that Phil Tippett is someone who could say that out loud,
yeah,
you know.
yeah.
So,
I love Phil Tippett. He's Phil Tippett, Dennis Muren, Spaz. I mean, those are all like reasons why I'm even in this industry. And
mm,
I'm and it, I'm it's I find it funny you bring up pixel fucking because I've been thinking about it a lot, and I think that is the exact reason why AI is not gonna be this automatic push. Like they used to tell me like, oh, I press D for dinosaur, and now I have a dinosaur, right? That's how computers work. The fact that we don't have granular control over any of this generative AI stuff, I
mm,
was like, that right there is why it's not going to be widely used for the foreseeable future. Because every visual effects studio wants to have absolute control over that final image.
yes.
It's so imperative.
Yeah. Well, and just to be clear, I think you mean every yes, VFX studios definitely want to have control, but it's because the creators, the
Yeah,
creatives, directors want that control and don't want to create generic content.
yeah, they want it to be
So
unique.
yeah, I to be honest, I'm probably not as optimistic about the where AI gets used in content creation,
Yeah,
and I think it already is resulting in generic content. But that's just because it can and it will, and if people don't want to pay, they'll get generic content. If they want to get something original, they'll get
yeah.
something original, So
We saw it with the Toys R Us ad that came out. Did you see it?
yeah,
That was
yeah.
I was like,
It's a terrible ad.
oh, they don't
It's
have money.
terrible.
Oh, that's what that is. That's all I thought was like, oh wow, they don't have any.
Yeah.
They have no budget.
Yeah.
Okay.
But hilariously, the release of that actually generates chatter about Toys R Us and AI. So it works for them,
Yeah.
in terms of what they wanted. But that's kind of my point is I think in term like finished content that just uses AI will be generic if it uses that. Where maybe we will use machine learning, Gen AI, and other AI tools is to help us get somewhere more quickly.
Yeah.
And that's already, of course, being used for quickly generating concepts, roto kind of, matte separation kind of. I know that there's always a lot of artistry behind that work as well. But remember that we're always using tools like technology to get us somewhere a bit more quickly,
Oh yeah.
possibly to spend more time on, the nuanced stuff. So it's in some ways, it's not that much different, I think, than introducing some other new tool. It's just ridiculous how quickly someone at their home computer or on their iPhone can do it. That's the difference, maybe.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Do you think it's going to be, you've covered so many advances in technology. I mean, it's visual effects, so it's pretty much every year there's some big thing. We saw it with like the volume at ILM.
Mm.
That had a massive impact with virtual production. Now you have AI. What's in recent years, how would you rank virtual production versus AI in terms of like industry impact?
Yeah, good question. I think virtual production has actually had even more impact than I thought it would. And I mean it in this way, in that it's a completely new business model
Yeah.
for visual effects studios and other studios. Of course, ILM offers stagecraft now, but there's a whole bunch of other visual effects studios in that space as well. Um, uh, so the business model that's offered by virtual production is really interesting, just because it's another thing for visual effects artists to do. And I kind of mean that in two ways, both like a business making entity, like money making entity, but visual effects artists who might have moved over to virtual production. I
Yeah,
mean, clearly a
or
lot of
games,
people.
and now we're kind of coming back over for that. Yeah.
Exactly. Exactly. Yeah. And so that's had a huge impact, I think, business wise. AI machine learning is going to change workflows. Like, it just will. Whether it changes, makes the content better, I mean, that's up to the creators and the filmmakers.
Yeah.
I, I'm sort of, my thinking about it is, just pretend we are back in the 90s and ILM has invented ambient occlusion, you know, and it was a really big game changer, but a sort of niche one. I don't think AI is any different in terms of there are small incremental steps and little developments being done very individually, almost not on a macro level. They're sort of being done at individual studios who then adopt them into their workflow and pipeline.
Yeah.
I think that's what's in visual effects. I think that's what's going to happen. I don't think there's going to be some sort of groundbreaking, huge, crazy, right? We're always using this technology for digital humans now.
Yeah.
I just think it's little bits of code that impact on individual pipelines, which is kind of the way visual effects gets done,
Yeah.
you know?
I find it
So,
interesting you're talking about the pipeline, because the pipeline is something people don't ever see.
yeah,
It's the backbone behind everything that really makes these giant movies possible on the scale that they're in. And
yes.
I'm kind of in line with what you're saying too. Is just that AI is going to have its biggest impact behind the scenes, organize, like even just studio documentation, like the power of
Sure.
having onboarding a lot quicker artists, because you can just give them like your studio AI to just ask questions, too.
Mm,
It's going to
mm,
speed up that onboarding process, getting people hitting the ground running and making the art. And you don't have to have 2-3 weeks of training. You can just have like a week, and that overhead gets lowered. The
yeah.
profit margins get a little bit bigger, and it might start making things a little bit, more sustainable as a business.
Yeah. I mean, don't get me wrong. I think there are things that get posted on Twitter and TikTok and Instagram that are done with Gen AI or relate to deep fakes that I just go, holy moly, we should look at what they posted a year ago, and we forget about the change that has happened, right? But I'm almost of the opinion that in the same way that a new tool comes out or a new workflow comes out at a visual effects studio, it just gets pulled in until it doesn't get used anymore. My feeling is some of these tools that are AI tools or machine learning tools, it'll be the same thing. We may, in fact, not even start calling them AI or machine learning tools. They're just tools.
Yeah.
Right. My big issue, as you probably can tell, is that we love this term AI.
Yeah.
And we love saying it because it makes us sound futuristic. I don't mean the visual effects industry. I just mean everybody.
If you have an AI startup right now, it's
exactly
the new hotness. Like, you're ready to go.
Yeah. And totally legit. I totally get it. Everyone called themselves Web 2.0 startups when that was the thing to say.
Yeah, it just happened.
Yeah, metaverse startups. Exactly. So none of it's surprising. I just think that the history of visual effects technology and innovation tends to be that they wrap it into their system when they need it, if they need it.
Yeah.
And I kind of love the individual innovation. ILM is just doing its thing with machine learning. Rising Sun is doing its thing. Weta's doing its thing. A whole of industry change, it doesn't always suit the visual effects industry to do that.
This right here, honestly, is why I was so excited to talk with you. When it was like over a month that I sent out that email. I was like, I'm just gonna see, like, maybe he'll want to chat, because you have a perspective that is only obtained through knowing the history of visual effects. And I think a lot of people get enamored with the gloss, the latest visual effects. Maybe that's part of what fuels the no CGIs. It always seems to get bigger and bigger and bigger, but they don't really quite remember the road that got us to there. And that road kind of tells us where things are also going to go, from here.
Yeah, that's true. And back to the no CGI thing, I have an opinion about where that came from, which is there were some terrible films and shows released that are just terrible films. Forget about whether they didn't have convincing visual effects or photoreal visual effects work. And studios got a bit scared of backlash and reviews that mention them. Mention particular, there was a few times in the mid 2000s where a film would get reviewed and they would say, this is such a great film, this is excellent, blah, 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 the actor's really good. And they'd save the last line of the review to say something bad about the CGI. And I always felt like it was a reviewer feeling like they needed to say at least one thing bad about the film, right?
Yeah.
And I just reckon that happened a few times, and film studios went, well, we don't want that to happen, so let's somehow keep the lid on what was done, and or even lie about it. And we saw these lies happen with Barbie and I guess Oppenheimer last year.
I can't even imagine being the compositor sitting there and being told you need to pull green screen footage off of this behind the scenes stuff and make it look like there's no green screen.
Oh my God.
Like, you have to just be like, what am I doing? What am I doing with my life? This is...
Yeah. I mean, it's been happening for a little while. They have regularly, color graded the blue screens down to gray.
Yeah.
For a long time in B-roll footage. But what Jonas found, I think, with Barbie was really fascinating, and was a great expose
it was great.
of masking what was going on. Curiously, though, it probably elevated the work in a weird way, because Framestore's work and some other visual effects studios that worked on that film, the whole point, it was meant to be invisible, right? I mean, it's a miniature type world, and it's, it's clearly a lot of set extensions and all that sort of thing in Barbie, but it's not meant to look like huge, crazy VFX camera moves and VFX shots. So in an interesting way, some of that, let's not talk about the CGI, actually serves to show how good the visual effects work is, and it certainly did in Barbie.
Totally.
You
And
know,
it was just funny too because that was the same year that Godzilla minus zero, like a relatively extremely small budget, visual
mm,
effects movie won the Oscar for best visual effects, and it was
yeah,
like there was this cool moment of this little indie project, really, that it was the director doing deskies, doing rapid, iterations right there with the artists. It was this new way of doing things.
yeah, and the film is great. I mean, that's
Oh,
one
it's
of the
fantastic.
reasons as well. You know, like, and the work looks amazing. I think their story is what helped win. Look, the work is
Agreed.
incredible. Actually, I'm going to put that out there. Their story of only having 30 or
The,
35 artists or whatever it was
that
is a
footage
really great story.
that
Yeah,
footage that they had of them all in that conference room, and it was
yeah,
every person that worked on the movie in the
yeah,
conference room getting the short list for the Oscar and them cheering. It was a fantastic story. You couldn't
yeah.
help but root for him.
Yeah, and you know, how do you tell a Godzilla story that's often in the waves without visual effects? I mean, there's no one thinks that that isn't going to involve visual effects. I think what happens is the big studios get worried when they're pushing a film that, you know, has not so obvious visual effects work. Um, because they want to put the cinematographer forward or
Sure.
the production designer forward for awards, but also just in general conversation. And they I think wrongly feel that by focusing or letting people focus on visual effects, they take away from that other side of the filmmaking. That's another thing that has come up in the past several years. You know, it's about who you push at award season,
Yeah.
and they get a bit scared that pushing visual effects is going to mean that people say, well, then why did you even build those sets,
Yeah.
or why did you even need the cinematographer? You know, which is me simplifying it, but it is what comes up
No, I,
sometimes.
I think you're right. I mean, we are definitely used to being at the bottom of the credit list too. Like
Yeah,
we're
yeah.
we're
Oh
very
my god.
comfortable down there. There's many reasons why
Yeah,
we're down there, but there's definitely like there's I think a little bit of it too had to do with the streaming, the boom in streaming and the rapid pace that visual effects artists had to then start going at Marvel, at all these big studios, and they just didn't have the time like they used to, and it's
yeah.
I'm really curious what you think about James Gunn with his announcement that like he wrapped a full year ahead of time just to give visual effects artists. I think the quote was like the time to do what they do best, or something like that. What was your
Yeah,
take on that?
I saw that. I'm going to preface that with saying that I saw that as a screenshot of a tweet. And then I think the original tweet's been deleted, so
Uh
that
oh.
doesn't exist anymore. So I don't think it's fake or anything like that, but I just want to preface it by saying I tried to find the original post by
I hope you didn't get
James.
fooled by AI. Damn it.
I don't think he did at all because there's been a lot of discussion about it. And talking to Steph Soretti, who's been on James's films, including Guardians of the Galaxy films, for such a long time, I think it's all true. I think James knows how hard it is to make these huge
Yeah.
films. If you saw Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 3, just that creature work and the amazing visual effects by places like Framestore and Weta Effects is just off the charts good.
Yeah.
And I'm not saying some other Marvel work hasn't been as good, but it seems to me that on Guardians Volume 3, they had a lot of time to prep it, plan it, then execute it.
Yeah.
And that's really the poster child, because we haven't seen Superman yet, for how James approaches this visual effects work. He just realizes it takes time,
Yeah.
and he wants it's not really just about the visual effects artist shaping it. It's him
Yeah. Well, and
shaping it as well,
I hope
which is a
he's
good thing.
setting that road, like that goalpost, right? Like he's setting that
Yeah.
direction. Hopefully that's where the conversation is going to go, like with
Yeah.
Zemeckis, that respect for the visual effects artists. I don't think, we've taken our licks. Like, I think we deserve some respect, right?
Yes.
Especially after the
I
last few years.
I I think a few VFX studios, supervisors, and artists are still in a little bit of PTSD
Yeah, I think
after
so.
COVID, when it was really busy. So busy means you've got a job and you're generally getting paid well because you're in demand. But busy also means no sleep, 7 days a week, crazy hours, and possibly, and I'm not going to pinpoint any projects, but possibly not producing the best work possible, right?
Sure.
Because as you say, it's got to get on streaming, it's got to meet the deadline, it's got to be released. And I reckon if you put a gun to my head, I can think of a few projects that clearly had that. Not necessarily because of the visual effects, but just fast decisions that directors and filmmakers had to make.
Yeah.
Studios had to make. So let's never do that again.
Let's learn our
But
lessons.
it was definitely out of COVID, and oh my god, we need to release this thing, because we're back.
Yeah.
And let's hope that never happens again. But yeah, as we're talking about all the challenges that visual effects industry faces, and there's just so many. It's hard to distill them all down, and I keep thinking visual effects artists do an incredible job in the circumstances.
Yeah.
So
Well, and I think too, like, I don't think a lot of people are aware of how hard it's been for visual effects artists. It's, we've seen some articles get posted here and there, but they're all kind of in the same echo chamber of, like it was, it's articles for visual effects artists by visual effects artists. The mainstream general public doesn't really care how the sausage is made. It's only us weird few that get really
it's funny,
into
yeah.
niche.
It's funny you bring that up. When some of that no CGI stuff was happening, there were definitely some mainstream pieces done in publications like the Washington Post, I think, or Vulture, or Wired magazine, and that's so good that they
That's fantastic.
bother to do it. But it does go away quickly.
Yeah.
It sort of peters out, and there's been a fair bit of that ever since the Rhythm and Hughes stuff. And so I don't know how to combat that myself. I've been lucky to have like roundtable conversations with people like Hugo and Jonas and Todd, where we say, what do you think we should do, as if we are the spokespeople for that sort of thing, which we're not. But I think the answer is just keep calling it out if we see it, right?
Yeah.
That's what I think it is. It's a bit tiring because sometimes it just rears its head, and you sort of think, oh, what am I going to do about this? But as I say, my approach is just to cover the work as it was done and then call out weirdness where we see it. And I think those guys have been doing it, and you guys as well, which is super cool.
We are small. We're trying to join and help where we can. I think that's what a lot of visual effects artists are doing right now. Is we don't know what the answer is, but we're all trying to help any way that we can.
Yeah.
And if it's even just talking about how, what's the cool new movie coming out? I've just enjoyed like trying to get back to that kind of that childhood, like that wow of the movies. Because when you're a visual effects artist, one thing they don't talk about is that you have now given up the ability to really sit back and enjoy a movie because you are picking out every little thing. Just my wife and I, it comes to mind. My wife and I were just in Las Vegas 2 weeks ago for the final Sphere show with the Dead and Company. And,
okay.
And ILM did a bunch of work for him. And there's this amazing shot right at the end. It's called the come down, and you're coming down from space all the way down to ground view in front of the Haight-Ashbury house that the Grateful Dead were. And I tapped Jess on the shoulder. It's been a great show. We are on cloud nine. And I point over in the corner, and there's flickering tree cards, like little alpha transparency. And I'm like, how? How did that? And she goes, and I was like, see, even here, man, you can't get it out of your head. And it was just in the corner. So, I've been trying to not do that and just enjoy the amazing work that visual effects artists do, because it is amazing. It's movie magic, childhood stuff,
Yeah. I'm occasionally in the same boat. I watch a film first first time, and then all I'm looking for is what questions I'm going to ask the visual effects supervisor.
Yeah.
And I really would prefer just to watch the film. But actually, it's funny, you know, that has resulted in me watching a number of films more than once recently, where I'm happy to admit I didn't enjoy it the first time. And it's not, and I would say because of I didn't think the story was good or execution was good. But then I've seen it again the second time and realized, oh, this is brilliant. This is much better than I realized. And I'll tell you the films, Eternals was one of them, the Marvel film. If everyone's watched that once and thought, watch it again.
Okay.
It's different somehow the second time. And then the more recent one is Furiosa, because of course I wanted that to be so good because Fury Road is a perfect film,
Yeah.
basically. And Furiosa, when you've watched it the first time, is like, oh, what happened?
Yeah, well, the trailer came out. It looked a little bit like underbaked, I guess would be the best way to describe it. But no, you're entirely right. When you actually watch the movie as a whole, it's George Miller at his finest. And I've heard some amazing stories of George Miller in a studio. Like, he's got some stories. The visual effects artists love him. They're just like, oh man, it was. Then George came by, and I was like, oh man, that's great.
Yeah. Well, it's just one of those films that when you absorb it a second time, you see a lot more, I think, and you realize why certain decisions were made.
Yeah.
I'm pretty sure that it suffers from being a little bit stylized. So if you want a gritty visual effects photoreal Australian desert film, that's not what it is.
Yeah.
You know, so, and even Fury Road is stylized a little bit as well. So yeah, I mean, I'm sort of channeling what you were saying about can you watch films and enjoy them anymore. I feel like I have to watch things twice now, which is fine, but it's just sort of what I have to do.
It's the sacrifice we make to keep the torch burning. You know, we're getting to the end of the interview. I really can't thank you enough for taking the time out to chat with me. I really want to end it on a nice positive note, and I want to hear, if you can, a tease of a future publication that you're about to do that you're really excited about, a future show you're about to cover. What are you really excited about?
That's a great question. I am just about to publish issue 21 of the magazine, and it's on virtual production. So as you said right at the top, I've changed the magazine a little bit, that each issue is now on like an individual topic.
That's awesome.
Or individual film. One of the recent issues was just about Avatar: The Way of Water, which was fun to do. This one is on virtual production, and it covers House of the Dragon season 2.
Fantastic.
Those About to Die, which is Roland Emmerich's TV show about Roman games, and it covers Fallout, which has some really great LED wall work that Magnopus
fantastic
supervised.
Visual effects works just in general. Yeah.
Yeah, and great VFX work. So I'm really excited to do that because in some ways, I hadn't done much virtual production coverage in a deep way for a little while. And it's been really great getting back into it and listening to what supervisors are saying as the virtual production industry matures a little bit. I mean, it's still kind of new.
Yeah.
If you're in games, people are like, wow, virtual production has been around for 30 years, 40 years. But yeah, so I've actually found it a great way for me to learn some new things or where the industry is up to. And yeah, so that's coming out basically beginning of September.
Well, I'm looking forward to it. Can you give anybody any links, or is obviously beforeandafters.com, anywhere else that you want people to find you?
Oh, well, it's always fun to interact with people on Instagram at Before's Mag, or Twitter is Before's Mag as well. So yeah, there's my socials.
Great. Well, I'll include them in the links below. And again, thank you so much for taking the time and chatting with us. I'll see you on the VFXTalk boards every now and then. Wave high. And
will do.
Cannot wait for the next publication. So keep up the great work. Fantastic. And have a good rest of your Monday. It's Monday, right?
I know it's Tuesday now. I'm ahead of you.
Tuesday.
So yeah.
Well, say hi to the future for me.
Thanks very much, Doug. This was fun.
Yeah, thank you so much. Have a good day, okay?
See you later.
All right, bye.